He graduated from Vienna University and Doctor in Law in 1961. In 1963, he was the Deputy Trade Commissioner of the Austrian Foreign Trade Office in Venezuela. In 1967, he has become the Deputy Trade Commissioner of the Austrian Foreign Trade Office in Montreal, Canada. In 1968, he was the Managing Director of the Association of Austrian Industries. And from 1970 until now, he is the Director General of the International Textile Manufacturers Federation. Dr. Herwig Strolz, our keynote speaker. I will please, Dr. Strolz.
Mr. Minister, Mr. Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. President of the Institute, organizer of this event, ladies and gentlemen, it's a particular pleasure to be here after 16 years. In actual fact, I came back just for a short while in the meantime, but really when I spent quite a number of years preparing for the ITMF annual conference here in Cairo, which was a memorable event that has left everybody with lasting impressions, be it for the generosity and the welcome and the hospitality that was a large group from the world of chief executives of textile companies from the world over. And then particularly because of that unforgettable tour to Upper Egypt, where a good part of conference delegates, and I think it was the largest participation in a post-conference tour we ever had, did join. And that I can only say to all those foreign guests who have been in this country for the first time, take your time and go to Upper Egypt. This is something that you will never forget. Egypt, of course, it has been said many times, one of the monuments to mankind in all respects, and certainly to the textile industry. A country where cotton was more or less invented, and still remains the leading fiber of the country, still one of the best natural fibers that we know in the world. Now, my subject today for this keynote address is waking up to reality, the textile industry in search of a new balance. Now, for quite a while now, the state of the textile market globally leaves the layman, even the informed observer, perplexed. Having risen by a paltry 1.5% in '98 and 2.9% in '99, fiber consumption, the nearest indicator of textile growth, has increased by only 2% in 2000. World GDP, in contrast, has expanded by 4.8% in that year. The latest estimate of the International Monetary Fund for 2001 showing continued growth in the mid 2% range. Although remaining abnormally low when considering the historical relationship between economic and textile growth, there is no doubt that the long-term trend of textile consumption in volume terms is pointing downwards, average annual fiber consumption having fallen from 3.7% in the 60s to 1.8% in the 90s. Slowing consumption has to do with the rich, with the poor, and with other factors, such as fashion. Whilst the industrial countries are still the largest fiber consuming group, the scale is expected to dip in favor of the developing countries anytime soon, the forecasters predicting their consumption to exceed that of industrial countries by over 10% in 1955. Demand growth for textiles in the rich countries is going down due to the phenomenon generally known as elasticity of demand, according to which people are spending less of their disposable income on textiles as that income goes up. And you see here when we are at the lowest level of income, well, practically all disposable or all income that is there goes into shelter and textiles. Now, as we move up into higher brackets, and this is about the picture that applies to the world at large, only about elasticity is about 0.6 to 0.5. So about if we earn more, 10% more, or have more, 10% more disposable income, we are spending only somewhere between 5 and 6% more on textiles. And if you go into the highly industrial, to the rich countries, the United States, the rest of Europe, and at that level, if the people's disposable income goes up by 10%, their textile consumption improves only by about 2%. The rest goes into holidays, goes into a nice new car, goes into a nice new laptop, or a mobile, whatever. There are so many things that are luring the consumer today. Now, fiber consumption growth in the poor countries is slowing because of lower population growth, which at least in the immediate future will only be partly compensated for by rising fiber consumption, which has actually remained stagnant from 1997 to 1999. Turning back to the relationship between fiber consumption and economic growth, we see in the historical perspective that when the world GDP growth had fell to 2%, fiber consumption growth contracted to near zero. Below 2% GDP growth, fiber consumption tended to become negative. Now follow me through these slides. You see here, this is world GDP growth from 1970 to 1998. And this is world fiber consumption growth during the same period. Now, if we cut off at the 2% range of GDP growth, we see a number of years during these not quite 30 years where textile fiber consumption growth has become negative, quite negative, or near zero. That was at the first oil crisis, 1974-1975. It was at the second oil crisis, 1980 to 1982. At the very short recession we had in the early 90s, and now 97-98 as a result of the Asian crisis. According to the fiber consumption forecast model of the International Cotton Advisory Committee, at world GDP growth of 5%, fiber consumption could rise by close to 3%. Actually should rise, because this is a forecast model. Now, having reached only 2% in 2000, textiles were clearly performing grossly below what could be expected under the model. The main culprit for weak textile demand more recently has, without any doubt, been the financial and economic crisis that hit Asia in mid-1997 and subsequently spread to other countries such as Latin America. Now, in the aftermath, domestic textile consumption has fallen drastically in some countries, many of which had previously been known as for their economic strong growth, such as East and Southeast Asian tiger states. Now, even if their carpet fiber consumption still stands at the lower end of the scale compared to the industrialized world, now something like 5 kilograms as against 30 kilograms in the United States, with a large number of people affected, take Indonesia, 200 million people living today in Indonesia. Now this can have a considerable impact on textile consumption in the world at large. Comparing consumption and investments over the last 20 years, we see an ever-widening imbalance in the supply and demand equation of the industry. Taking the period from 1980 to 1998 alone, the record is based on the annual survey of shipments of textile machinery by the ITMF, shows for the world outside of China, former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, an accumulated excess investment in the cotton system sector of around 20 million spindle equivalents, corresponding to 15% of the installed capacity on a unit basis, and up to 25% if adjusted for productivity. The overinvestment in weaving would seem to be of similar proportions. Now, overcapacity in the textile industry is not a new phenomenon. The ITMF record shows a beginning of surplus investment accumulation in the cotton spinning industry as early as the mid-60s, which eventually reached its culmination in the late 80s and early 90s. Now please again follow me through these sequences here. This is staple fiber consumption. Now, remember, we are in spinning, therefore we consider only staple fiber consumption. We do not look at filament because obviously filament is not used in the spinning industry. So this is staple fiber consumption in ME. ME stands for market economies. Again, this is the world again without China, Eastern Europe, and the former Soviet Union. Here are our investments, and indexed at 1982 is 100, and these investments are investments of spindle equivalents, that is, ring spindles and the ring spindles equivalents of rotors on, of course, a productivity basis. Now, if we make this area below black, then this, what here remains, is our overcapacity. So you see, it started out in the mid-60s already. It was like, you know, the pre-Alps in Europe. And then here, this one, the Himalayas of the late 80s and early 90s. And these tiny little things, just in 2 years of these 60 years, these 40 years since 1960, in only 2 years have you taken out overcapacity. That is, we have invested less than the absorption capacity of the market would have allowed. In wool spinning, where ITMF started to collect investment data in 1979, we see a similar propensity to overinvestment in the late 80s and early 90s, which was followed by a strong counterbalancing movement in the second half of the 90s, leaving the wool textile industry in a much better balance than the cotton system sector as it entered the millennium. The drastic market
imbalance the primary textile industry is facing today has many causes. The most important being free access to manufacturing technology, the rapid globalization of the industry, and investment planning with a local instead of a global perspective. All that has happened despite the fact that the signs were up on the wall as early as 1990, when ITMF cautioned the industry for the first time that the supply and demand imbalance was building up in the primary textile pipeline globally. There are indications that the rebalancing process is underway. Between 1990 and 1999, investments in new short staple ring spinnings, less shipments by China, have fallen by 69%, and in new shutters looms by 52%, always on a comparable basis. In long staple, that is in wool ring spindles, and in oil rotters, where the culmination point had been reached in 1988, the contraction, the 12 years to 1999, amounted to 73 and 81% respectively. The data is also reflected in the volume of manufacturing capacities in place and is now affecting even the most modern manufacturing technologies. Now follow me here through these slides. You'll see this is our world installed spindles in the cotton system, including all countries in the world. And here follow rotors, the more modern technology to ring spinning. And we see that both have peaked ring spinning in 1999 and rotor spinning in 1994. And if we move on to weaving, these are shutless loom shipments since 1980. These are shutless loom installations since 1980, worldwide, cotton system only. And these are shuttle loom installations since 1980. And you see the shuttle loom is going out, of course we all know that. Shutless loom, new shutless loom investments in the world have peaked already back in 1994. Now the 90s having been black years for the textile machinery industry, the closing year of the last decade has brought a short-lived recovery. Shipments of new machines in 2000 having risen on a comparable basis by 35 to 50%, depending on the machinery category. Geographically, recovery has been widespread, the main focus of Asia, as in the past, but a good participation of other areas, especially Latin America, the only weak point being the United States. Now, impressive as these rates may appear, they have to be seen in the light of the longer-term investment picture. In cotton system spinning, shipments remained the second lowest in 11 years despite the rise. The same applies to rotor spinning and to texturing, the time series of the latter stretching back to 1994 only. Despite the recovery, shipments of new shutless looms remained on a comparable basis the third lowest in 11 years. In circular knitting, finally, investments moved up to the second highest level in the time series that now covers 6 years for that sector. Although the ITMF machinery shipment report for 2001 is not yet out, there are indications that whilst in some areas investments have been maintained or even increased, such as ring spinning, quite surprisingly, last year, but also in rotor spinning. There have been downturns in other areas, such as in weaving, with about minus 50%, and in particular, circular knitting. Now, against the background of the analysis just presented, we should now better understand why we are finding ourselves in a state of morosity that has become a characteristic feature of this industry in the more recent past. It is the colossal imbalances between supply and demand we have been building up collectively in the 80s and early 90s, which is hanging like a millstone on our neck. Whilst in the past, the impact of the rising imbalance has been hidden behind the smokescreen of regulations under which international trade in textiles was conducted, the opening of markets has brought the real proportions of this imbalance progressively to bear. One of the biggest challenges facing our industry is hence the re-establishment of a better equilibrium between supply and demand. If we continue, as we have done in the greater part of the last 2 decades, to invest with a local instead of a global perspective, we will never get out of the oversupply situation in which we have been trapped now for years. In broad terms, the textile market today is made up of 65 to 70% of commodity textiles. That is, products more or less everyone can produce. About 25 to 30% are textiles with some kind of fashion content, and the glittering world of labels holds 2 to 5%. The commodity mass market has low profit margins and high volumes. The world of labels, low volumes and high returns. It is in the mass market segment where nearly all of the overcapacity is concentrated today. Moving out of that segment and upgrading production has become an imperative for all those who find it more and more difficult to survive in a competitive environment of that sector. Escaping the commodity trap requires a fundamental change in the company from production to innovation management. It was Joseph Schumpeter, the well-acclaimed Austrian economist, who 70 years ago put the stimulation of innovation at the center of the role of the modern entrepreneur and coined the term creative destruction, which occurs when innovation makes all ideas and technologies obsolete. Textiles provide a wide and particularly fertile ground for innovation, whether it is in apparel, home, furnishings, or technical applications. In a recent edition of Link, the quarterly journal of the world-renowned Rita company, in which ITMF collaborated, attention was drawn to the wide variety of end users spinners can cater to. Depending on the yarn performance levels, companies can achieve standard or higher. And the kinds their machinery will let them spin, coarse to fine. The choice of product segments spinners can serve is far greater than is generally believed. Just following through here, we have on the Corsan side the furniture textiles, denim and terry fabrics. We have on the upper higher end of the performance requirements, technical textiles, protective and safety workwear. Down there, moving into the finer counts, home textiles, sheetings, bed, table, kitchen, yarns for casual and sportswear, yarns for day and night wear, mainly knitted, yarns for inlet and popeline, and that is a very high performance level yarn. We have yarn for shirts and blouses, and at the very high end in fine yarns, the specialty yarns for like thawing thread or pharmaceutical fabric. Now, against the impressive list of different end users and the enormous variety and quality parameters that go with it, who can seriously maintain that spinners are limited with the range of products they can manufacture? That is not to speak of weavers or knitters, whose potential area of innovation is virtually unlimited. Among the many elements required for a successful implementation of innovation management is technological leadership. Only companies working with the latest technology will be able to avoid the commodity trap in which too many textile manufacturers are being locked today. What we therefore need in future is continued investment with a progressive reduction of the part that goes into expansion and a commensurate extension of the one that goes into modernization. Continuous investment is a must, not only for those moving into the higher end of the market, it also is a sine qua non for the mass market suppliers because of the rapid rising requirements for product quality, which are expected to take another quantum leap when the last quantitative barriers to textile trade will have fallen in 2005. The investment history of the 90s, as evidenced by the ITMF Textile Machinery Shipment Survey, provides ground for cautious optimism that the textile community internationally has at long last recognized that it cannot expand its supply base forever. Caught in the vicious circle of rising overcapacity, falling prices, dwindling profit margins, and ever-increasing investment costs, the time for adjustment could not be delayed forever. In 1999, the textile industry in market economies has, as I said, for the first time in 40 years, invested less in new spinning equipment than the growth in consumption would have allowed. Even if we have, in that year, reduced our overcapacity by only a tiny amount, it is a hopeful sign that the industry collectively is beginning to take the signs on the wall seriously and is starting to act upon it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Strolz. I would like to welcome to the podium